Hi, I'm your Wegener and welcome back to the Early Bird Photo News. I've just returned from a crazy road trip halfway across Australia, filled with thousands of kilometers of driving, unexpectedly cold temperatures, thousands of rainbows, some gear frustrations, and many rare birds. The first almost 2 days of the trip we basically spent just driving without doing any photography, getting us all the way west past the Eyre Peninsula and close to the Nullarbor Desert. And then the next morning we started driving off in the dark, trying to get to the first destination where we wanted to see the Nullarbor quail thrush. Luckily I had done some good research on eBird and some other websites before my trip, so it took us only about 20 to 30 minutes before we found the first bird. Now, photographing them actually turned out to be quite difficult because they were extremely skittish and they live in this completely open saltbush desert with no trees at all. So approaching them wasn't easy, but after persisting for a few hours, we managed to get close enough for a few birds to get some nice photos and videos. Encouraged by that success, it was time to move on to the main target of the trip, the Narretha blue-bonnet parrot. The first afternoon we drove up and down many rough dirt roads looking for the parrots, but couldn't find any birds at all and started to get slightly discouraged because it's not always easy to see the birds. But luckily we allowed ourselves enough time to find the birds. However, the next morning started just as slow as the previous afternoon, with us not seeing or hearing any birds. But suddenly I did hear a familiar parrot noise and two of the birds flew right in front of us in a tree. However, it was one of the most unphotogenic trees I'd ever seen, and the birds were heavily covered by branches, allowing me only to get one horrible photo before taking off and never to be seen again. Now I was kind of frustrated and excited at the same time because I had seen the birds but wasn't able to photograph them at all yet. So we were thinking, should we stay longer or should we move on to other targets and then come back to the spot later on, when suddenly another pair flew in a tree in front of us again, but this time right out in the open, allowing us some amazing photo opportunities. Now that was definitely a fantastic start to the trip, and we decided we're going to stay another night hoping for more birds the next morning. But when we woke up, we were confronted by strong winds and constant showers. But it turned out that that actually was a good thing, because after a little bit of looking around, we found 10 Narretha bluebonnets that were feeding in a wind-protected area. And so we had 2 or 3 hours with these amazing birds right in front of us, giving us amazing photo and video opportunities. So being out in the Nullarbor Desert and then suddenly finding 10 of these rare and hard to photograph birds that put on a great show for us was definitely one of the highlights of the trip. The biggest challenge in the strong wind was definitely hand holding my 600mm prime lens, because the wind just grabbed the lens and kind of made it almost impossible to keep the birds in the viewfinder. So at times I was actually taking off the lens hood to be able to have a slightly shorter lens that wasn't as affected by the wind. By that time, we're already almost 1 week into the trip now, but we thought, what's an extra few hundred miles to the west? And so we decided to drive all the way into Western Australia, looking for beautiful pink cockatoos and some other cool birds like copperback quail thrushes. We spent 2 days there before making a sharp U-turn and then heading back towards the Eyre Peninsula, where we actually bumped into a huge flock of rock parrots, found some beautiful Port Lincoln parrots, and also had an amazing encounter with the elusive western whipbird, which is usually very hard to see, but this particular bird climbed right up to the top of a shrub and started singing for us. Getting these birds definitely added to the highlights of this trip, but now it was time to head back towards Sydney because we only had about 4 days left before I had to fly back to the Sunshine Coast. In the last day and a half, we decided to look for another bird that is almost impossible to photograph, the elusive eastern ground parrot. And the first afternoon we got there, we definitely had one of those magical days where 2 birds would suddenly walk out from the shrubs to the edges of the road, feeding on some grass seed, allowing us some amazing photos and video opportunities. To end the day on a high like this, photographing even more parrots that I never photographed before, was definitely an amazing experience and made me forget all those very cold nights in the camper and those endless hours of driving miles and miles and miles. This trip was also unique for me because I exclusively handheld my 600mm prime lens the whole time. Now ideally I would like to shoot from a tripod, especially for video and in these windy conditions, But hand holding was simply the better choice because we were photographing many ground-dwelling birds and birds quickly moving from one area to another or changing their height quickly. Another thing that stood out to me was the amazing performance of the RF 600mm prime lens with the R5 Mark II in both teleconverters. Many of the birds we were photographing were quite skittish and didn't really want to come close enough to us, so I had to use the 2x extender a fair bit, but even wide open I got amazingly nice and crisp and detailed results with it. Now, of course, it's better to use the lens without a teleconverter than with a teleconverter, but on these high-end lenses, you can definitely get away with it and allowing you to get your subject much larger in the front while also maintaining good image quality. By far the biggest frustration of my trip was the autofocus though, and I'm sure a lot of you guys can relate. On a nice and clean setup with a more distant background, the cameras work quite well, but across the brands that I had with me, they all struggled the moment there was the tiniest blade of grass or stick between me and the subject. It's actually amazing how the cameras can kind of fail to jump on your subject and kind of get hung up on the tiniest bit of grass or a twig, which can be super frustrating. And I ended up with hundreds of out of focus images where the camera simply either gone past my target onto the grass or got stuck on something in front of my target. Now, of course, I also got many sharp images with the eye tracking, but this was definitely super annoying in the field when you're trying to track a parrot walking through the grass and your camera constantly jumps off your subject onto something else that wasn't even visible in your frame. So there's definitely still a little bit of a disconnect between the subject recognition that can sometimes see your subject and then the autofocus itself that instead of jumping onto the subject, get kind of caught up on something else between you and your subject or past your subject. And this is probably one of the biggest things I would love to see the manufacturers work on, where the subject recognition takes control and tells the camera this little blade of grass is not a bird, so keep looking for the bird or stay on the bird. It's definitely challenging to shoot when the eye tracking autofocus doesn't work, but this is why I set up my cameras in certain ways with spot autofocus and manual focus activated, so I can always intervene when the eye tracking doesn't properly work. And the key to the best autofocusing results is definitely pre-focusing. The more you're pre-focusing or slightly pre-focus in front of your bird, the easier it will be for your autofocus to lock right onto your target. So what I do in most situations is to use the spot autofocus to pre-focus in a similar distance to my subject, and then use the manual focus to fine-tune the focus to the point where the camera is basically already seeing my subject. And when I then press the eye tracking, it usually jumps right onto target and stays onto my target for a while. And when it wanders off again, I use the manual focus to bring it back onto my target and then engage the eye tracking again. And with that 1, 2, 3 kind of punch of spot autofocus, manual focus, and eye tracking, I was still able to focus on the parrots that were walking through the grass, but it was definitely a challenge. And the one takeaway here is definitely the more your bird is already in focus before you engage tracking, the better your results will be. Have you guys had the same trouble where a tiny branch or one little blade of grass is ruining your focus and instead of going onto the bird, it's going onto that little piece of grass? Before we move on to some exciting news, I wanted to share an interesting example with you that shows why I often say that 20 frames or less per second is not enough when it comes to birds in flight and action photography. Because I was photographing this honeyeater at 20 frames per second, and when it took off, I got the same pulse 6 times every time with the wings down because the frequency of the bird's wings perfectly aligned with the 20 frames per second, and I got the same pulse over and over again, as opposed to camera like an A9 III for instance with 120 frames per second, where you get every single wing pulse all the time. Now, of course, these images wouldn't be keepers anyways, but I thought it was a great showcase of why having faster frames per second when it comes to action can be greatly beneficial. Over the next few weeks, I'll definitely have a lot of image editing and sorting ahead of me, but I'll share some of the results with you over the course of the next few videos. And if you want to get a head start when it comes to image editing and learn the most important tools and techniques that allow you to get amazing results from your own RAW files, I would highly recommend that you check out my Lightroom and Next Generation Photoshop Masterclasses that are linked for you down there in the description. In my classes, I teach you step-by-step and easy to follow Lightroom and Photoshop workflow that you can apply to all your RAW images and get stunning results every single time. And of course, you won't just be watching, because I'm also providing you with my own raw files so you can edit right alongside me. And if you're not sure if my classes are worth it or the right fit for you, check out some of the amazing reviews that I get on a daily basis from many happy students who I've helped to transform the editing lives, who now got great results with ease and actually enjoy the editing process. So if you want to turn your time in front of the computer from a frustrating chore where you don't know which photos to pick or what sliders to pull into a rewarding experience where you have an easy to follow workflow that can be applied to all your files and you're guaranteed great results, make sure to check out my masterclasses down there in the description. I know they will help you a lot. Speaking of editing, Adobe has made some drastic changes with their latest release of Camera Raw that affects Adobe Camera Raw and Lightroom. Because gone are the days of having to create separate DNG files that clog up your hard drives. With the latest release of Camera Raw, we can now either click right and go to Enhance, and that opens up the Details section on the right hand side, or we can directly navigate to the Details section and in there click Noise Reduction. And then Adobe will still apply the noise reduction to our images, but will not create a separate DNG file anymore. And once the file is rendered, we can even change the strength with the slider. So now you can just have your RAW file with the AI noise reduction applied in Lightroom or Camera Raw without having that extra annoying file flying around on your hard drives. Pretty cool change, isn't it? And definitely a big separation compared to other programs now like DxO Pure Raw or Topaz Denoise that will always make you create that extra large DNG file. So now, depending on your computer, it will still take a little bit of time to render that noise reduced file, but not having that DNG file anymore is a pretty cool change, isn't it? I also just picked up this tiny little hard case here from a brand called Collab. Before I left for my trip, I actually was researching hard cases as well that I could either check or even have as carry-on. This one is actually still a carry-on size. And interestingly, they reached out to me on Instagram asking if I wanted to try one of their cases. And so, of course, I said yes. And so here's one of their cases. Definitely not the lightest, but at the same time, it has some amazing features like IP67 waterproofing, and apparently it's also 100% dust proof. So if you're in a dusty environment or on a pelagic trip, for instance, this could be a great way of keeping your gear clean and dry. Now, opening up this case in my studio is definitely a challenge, but you can see we have some nice pouches up here and then some really nice sort of padded dividers that are also very easy to adjust with these little pins here. And that allows me to easily put my gear in and make the adjustments that I need. So all in all, a great looking case that of course also has wheels and a handle. What I also love about the case is that it comes with an optional battery pack that you can insert into the case and then charge all your gear while you're traveling with your case. Now this is definitely an interesting looking case, and I will let you all know how I go with it after I used it a little bit more in the field, and I might even take it to the beach and kind of dip it in the ocean to see how it's going and how that waterproofing is going. But in all seriousness, I think I mainly use it in the car where I can put all my filming gear into it, and then it's nicely protected and also should stay dry and not get too humid or moldy inside this case as well. And if you guys are interested in this cool case, I also linked it for you down there in the description. In my last video before I left, I broke the news that the R6 Mark III would likely be announced in Q4 this year and would come with a larger megapixel sensor somewhere in that sort of 30 to mid 30 megapixel range. And that would definitely make it a super exciting camera for me, because having that sort of 30 to mid 30 megapixel range would make it an even more appealing wildlife camera for many people, including me, especially if it also has great video features. And when we look at the rumor side, it seems like what I said has been holding true, with a few more sites reporting that the camera will come with that larger megapixel sensor, which is definitely great to hear. Now, there are some reports that the camera might be released sooner, maybe even in July, and while that could be true, all I've heard is that it will likely be announced in Q4 this year. I also specifically asked my sources about the R7 Mark II, but it's basically crickets in that regard. So while there's a small chance that that camera will be announced very soon, maybe in July or later this year, at the moment there hasn't been really any information, and all the people that are usually in the know haven't really said anything just yet. That might not mean anything, but if I had to guess, I would say the camera is not imminent right now. Now, of course, I would love to be wrong and see an R7 Mark II with a stacked sensor, 40 frames per second, 32 megapixels, and a large buffer tomorrow, but I'm not quite sure that's going to happen. Interestingly though, Canon Rumors posted an article where they said that it's very likely that Canon will leave out the mechanical shutter from the R7 Mark II as one of their first in their lineup of cameras. Now there's already cameras that don't have a mechanical shutter anymore, like the Nikon Z8 or Z9 for instance. And I would love to hear from you guys. Are there certain situations where you use the mechanical shutter or do you mainly use the electronic shutter? Personally, I basically use the electronic shutter 100% of the time, but at the same time, the camera has to be capable of producing good results with that electronic shutter. So if the R7 Mark II comes without a mechanical shutter, it would definitely need to have a fast stack sensor without the crazy rolling shutter issues that the current camera has. And also it would need a large enough buffer if it shoots at these high frame rates, because it's also annoying to have a fast camera and then instantly hitting the buffer all the time. So definitely exciting times when it comes to new camera releases, but not too many news just now. Speaking of new cameras, it also looks like that Sony will be releasing 2 or 3 new cameras over the next sort of 3 to 4 months. And I'm sure that one of these cameras will be the A7 IV, which is highly anticipated by many nature photographers. And if this camera can come with the latest AI autofocusing, raw pre-capture, maybe 20 frames per second and a sort of mid 30 megapixel range sensor, I think Sony would definitely be on to a winner and would be a great camera to pair with a lens like the 400 to 800 for instance. Is that a camera that you guys are interested in? I always feel like there's a bit of a gap in the Sony lineup. You have the amazing and fast cameras like the A9 III or the A1 II, and then there's a bit of a gap with cameras like the A7R5 or the A7 IV that perform well in the field but are much slower than the other cameras. And this is why I would really love to see an increase in the frames per second in that A7 V. In a week or two, I will also be getting the Nikon Z50 II and the Z5 II to test in the field and make a few videos for you guys. So if you have any questions about these cameras, maybe something that you want to learn about, let me know in the comments. This week also seems to be the last week before Nikon will increase their prices on June 23rd in the US. On some products it's not as much, but on certain lenses it seems to be quite a big jump in price. So if you're looking at one of these lenses, it might be worthwhile pulling the trigger now. And on this note, I think it's time to wrap up today's video, and I would love to hear from you guys all your thoughts about this video in the comments. What is the gear you're looking forward to? Have you had similar struggle with grass getting in your way? Let me know in the comments. Give me a thumbs up for the video, check out my channel membership and masterclasses, and of course, hit that subscribe button, and I'll see you guys in another video very soon. Bye!